I taught my bird to whistle like a referee. I can make a free throw when I'm down on one knee. I've been a fan of basketball since I was 5. Now I am a fan of HoopSpeak Live. Hilarious analysis of mystifying trope. An angel with a cudgel breaking bubbles of soap. Like honeybees buzzing around a hive. Everybody buzzing about HoopSpeak Live.
Hey, welcome to HoopSpeak Live. I'm your host, Beckley Mason. We've got a very exciting show today, bringing on John Hollinger, very prolific and prophetic writer. His projections last year beat Vegas by a mile for NBA wins, and we're going to have him on to talk about some of the ones that he's already done. And right on cue, let me introduce the guest, or not the guest host, the co-host, Mr. Ethan Sherwood-Strauss, back from a day of absence. If he can figure out how to hop on. And tomorrow, hey, there you are. Tomorrow we're going to have Tom Haberstroh, and the next day after that, Kevin Arnovitz. Let's just jump right into our first segment, which is you and I disagreeing about the Clippers. What do you think?
Yeah. I think I'm just going to put this out there. There aren't so many title contenders, and in a hypothetical land where they had a good coach, a reasonably good coach, instead of Vinny Del Negro, would this not be a title contending roster? Would this not be a title contending team? And I say that with the knowledge that that's a vague term, so I would put it at better odds than the 14-1 that the Chicago Bulls are currently getting. I would put it that way.
Okay, so would you put them on like Celtics level?
Yes. I would put them. That's a complicated question because they're in a tougher conference. The Celtics would have absolutely no shot at the title if they were in the West, but because they're in a conference where there is one clear favorite, should something unfortunate befall that favorite, then they have a better avenue. But yes, I would put them at better than the Celtics with a hypothetically decent coach. I think, I mean, this connects to a broader discussion where we've almost swung too far against Blake Griffin. I feel like he annoyed people with his flopping and general sneer. Yeah. Well, at Oracle, I had never experienced such lusty hatred of another player, and it doesn't come quite across so much on camera with him. Or at least the full unlikability of Blake, because sometimes when the camera's not looking, while coming back on defense, he'll play it up to the crowd a bit and he'll sneer at them and he'll complain. You just get more, but that's coming off topic. I guess what I'm saying is that there are a few guys who have his skills, the ability to handle, the ability to get really easy points around the basket, and also he's a fantastic passer. And I've made the point before that he's never going to become an elite defender, but at least with his mobility against some of these faster, quote-unquote, small ball lineups, he should be a serviceable defender. So I almost feel like people have swung too far against Blake Griffin, and he is a superstar-level talent alongside, obviously, Chris Paul, and that should be enough.
Right. I think you're right about Griffin insofar as, it's almost like the fact that he mainly scores around the basket is now used as a theme song quote cudgel against him. And
Big cudgel.
It's the same thing that LeBron used to get. Like, he can't shoot, so he doesn't have a polished offensive game. Well, actually, he just gets right to the rim, so it doesn't matter that he can't shoot as much as it does with some other players. And I think you're right. It has swung a little bit in the other direction for personality reasons.
Yeah, well,
but I look at this roster, and I see, I have a real. I guess you would say maybe Eric Bledsoe is their third best player. Everyone else who's good is old and not getting any better. And that's why I worry about this team this year is, they had basically ideal health circumstances last year and won about 50 games. If anything happens, especially to Paul, but they don't have a lot of depth, and I just don't think that their roster has any bite to it outside of their two best players. And as we've noted, Griffin, does have deficiencies that are obvious, and even if they're not crippling, they're easy for really good teams to exploit.
Well,
mind if I cut in?
What do you got, Harper?
By all means,
here's something to think about with the Clippers. They are not a contender, but they did get Lamar Odom. And yes, Lamar Odom sucked last year. Like, he was so bad.
Very fat.
But the year before, he was the best sixth man in the world. Then he had a tragic offseason. He had a tragic offseason. He had a horrible lockout shortened season. And now he's just going to be terrible forever. Like, he could be a very important and a very dangerous player for them going forward. I don't believe that he's dead as an NBA player.
I just love the idea of you traveling the world looking for a better sixth man than Lamar Odom that year, and then concluding at the end of it.
Looked!
Like holding like the shepherd's staff looking off into the distance. It must be here somewhere.
I'll watch every game of this Philippines league. Scouring the universe. I just want to point out with Blake really quickly that he's not that far. He's not that far. He shot 37% on long twos last year, and once you get over that 40 range, that's a legitimate threat, and he's closer to being a well-rounded player than many observers give him credit for.
Sure, and he also shot really well in the second half of the year. So, like if he shot like 43% or something. Arnovitz had the stat over the second half of the year. I mean, it was a prolonged couple months that gives you hope that he could do that all season. And if he does that, you're right. I mean, it's miserable because then he gets to attack a closeout instead of a defender who's just waiting for him to drive. Okay, we got to move quickly because we have a lot coming on this show. First, this is a segment we don't have any art yet for. Relax, Zach. I'm not teeing you up yet. It's called hey man, that's a cool stat. And the cool stat is we've been reading a lot today. It was on True Hoop and in Hollinger's profile of the Celtics about offensive rebounding rate and how a lot of really good teams and specifically really good defenses don't hit the offensive glass. They'll send four back, four back, and maybe one to the glass, which is why Ryan Anderson is a better offensive rebounder than Dwight Howard, as Howard was sent back to protect the paint, and Anderson was given a free run at the basket. Same with Dwan Blair in San Antonio. And so my Nito stat, didn't want to say Nito, stole it accidentally from Russillo. My stat here is that the Lakers, when they were contending in the late aughts, were always in the top 7, and the Chicago Bulls, all 6 of their championship years, were in the top 2 or 3, and we're talking like 35% offensive rebounding rate. And at first I thought that was because of Rodman, but it looks, it was endemic even before that. So Horace Grant, I mean, I just think it's an interesting thing that you can look at in different eras, different things working for people, and even in our own era. And I wonder, I didn't watch enough of them and didn't study that, but what they did specifically that allowed them to just murder on the offensive glass, if it's just a function of the triangle.
I just want to know, is there a way for me to shoehorn this into my overarching zone defense has changed everything theory? I don't have the technical skills to necessarily do that, and I haven't examined any of the evidence, but I just want to know, is there a way for me to cram that in somehow into that thesis?
I think you just did.
Oh, okay, cool.
Nice work. Okay. Moving on, next segment, another one we don't quite have art yet for. It's called, this is a good tee up for Hollinger, who's coming in right after this, Zach Harper and the Rage Within.
Okay. I love the fact that everyone loves the Nuggets. I mean, they're everyone's Little League team. They're going to be so great, and they're going to get participation awards, and they're going to get trophies, and they're just so lovable because there's no star, and you don't need stars in this world. You are your own star and all that crap. They are very good. They're going to be one of the best teams in the league during the regular season. This still doesn't mean that they can compete for an NBA title. We got to stop pretending you don't need guys that you can go to at the end of games, because you do. They showed that last year. Maybe Ty Lawson can turn into that. Probably not. Maybe JaVale McGee can turn into that. Maybe through a kind of like a David Blaine hilarity induced clown act, he could distract defenses and dominate in the paint when he needs to. But most of all, you need someone that can really get it done. I want Gallo to be great. He's not. He's very good. He's not great. You need superstars in this league to win. You always have. There's been like literally 1 year in 20 years where it didn't happen, and that was Detroit, and they are not Detroit.
We are going to just take some audience questions. So, audience, help us out. What do you got? Ethan, something on your mind?
Yeah. No, I wanted to bounce a question to Zach. Would you say that last year the Spurs were title contenders? Yes?
Sure. Absolutely.
Would you say that the Spurs had a superstar last year? Would you say that the Spurs had
absolutely.
any player? So you'd say that they had players better than Andre Iguodala?
Oh my God, yeah. Tony Parker and Manu Ginobili were definitely better than Iguodala.
Manu Ginobili couldn't play a full game, and I don't know about Tony Parker over Iggy as far as the defense Iguodala.
Are you serious?
Provide. Yeah.
Nobody could stop them in the playoffs for much of the playoffs.
Well, yeah, that was a function of them being a very good team, but I think that the idea that a team can't win without a superstar might be refuted just because the Spurs are in a good position to do so. And I don't believe that they had a top 10 player on that roster.
But I mean, a top 10 player. I mean, the Nuggets don't have a top 10 player now. I think Tony Parker's a lot closer to being a top 10 player than Andre Iguodala is. Tony Parker, I'm not saying Iggy isn't good and he's not very good and he's not capable of affecting games, but Tony Parker can legitimately take over games for long stretches, which I think is kind of the definition of a in-game superstar.
Well, I can certainly see that, and I don't have a strong opinion on one versus the other because Iguodala's specialty is defense, which is a bit more vague and hard. It's just harder to quantify than offense is. In response to, I think, Brandon over here in the question queue says Parker got MVP talk and first team NBA consideration. That was more resulting from the Spurs team success. I don't think anybody, if they were being rational about it, would hand Tony Parker an MVP vote or a first team NBA vote. I think that was indicative of how good the Spurs were, not necessarily him being a superstar. I guess what I'm saying is that I just don't think that
he finished. Hold on, real quick. He finished 5th in MVP voting.
I know, but those people are being stupid.
Yeah, but
that's my point.
Team that won the most games. There's always going to be on the team that won the most games a high MVP. I mean, it's just impossible to get through a season without doing that. This is actually an interesting question. I think this is the biggest one the Nuggets have to answer more than anything else because they fulfill a lot of the functionality of a superstar, right? By having guys who can drive to the rim, who can play good defense, who pass the ball well. But this is something that's going to be really interesting, and it comes from our good friend Dre. How will the Nuggets handle three-point shooting? This is the big bugaboo for them is that Afflalo was their best shooter last year. He's gone. Iguodala had a career year. If he doesn't keep that up, and they lost Harrington too, who was one of their helped their offense a lot by. What's that?
I said one of Dre's favorites, Al Harrington, one of his favorite players in the world.
Anyway, I think that this is an interesting question, and I think a lot of the people who really like this team, I mean, my sort of take on this is that I'm guessing that everyone who's young on this team is going to shoot better because that's typically the trend. So I'm assuming that Gallo is going to shoot better than he did last year. I'm assuming that Ty Lawson is going to shoot a little better than he did last year, and I'm assuming that Iguodala holds steady. But it is worth noting that those are all big question marks, and if they can't shoot, they're still going to be at the rim all the time. But if the game slows down as it tends to in the playoffs, and they can't push the pace as much as they'd like to, you wonder about them being able to capitalize on their ball penetration, which is going to be they're going to have a dribble drive motion offense most likely.
Yeah, and I think that perhaps they should have JaVale McGee specialized in three-point hook shots. I'm just throwing that out there. No, in all seriousness, with Gallo, he's an interesting case because he came into the league as a three-point sniper, and over the past 2 seasons, he hasn't been that good from deep. So, in a way, a little like Griffin, he's not far from adding a skill or being near a skill that should really vault his game into a new territory. Three-point shooting, going back to what it was for him might be enough to put him in kind of an all-star level status. So I think that's something to watch out for Gallo.
Zach, you just conceding this?
No, I'm Gallo's just. I mean, I think he's very limited. Like, we all want him to be blossom into this great player. He's a good offensive weapon, but if you're relying on him to end games for you, I just don't see how that works unless he's had some magical leap from last season to this season, and if he is capable of
his hands last year. I mean, so
right. So I mean, some guys are always hurt. Like, we're waiting for Eric Gordon to break out, but he's always hurt. I mean, something always happens to prevent some guys from getting better, and he might just be one of those guys.
All right, cool. Yeah, I want to take on this next question from Chris Barnwell. What are the chances that VDN stays with the Clippers after the season? If he doesn't, do they go after Stan Van Gundy? This is an interesting one because, you'd have to ask Clipper GM Chris Paul. They structured Vinny Del Negro's deal so that it runs out the same year that Chris Paul's did. And I have a feeling that the reason they didn't replace Vinny is, one, Paul and Griffin weren't going to publicly come out and say they wanted him gone. And if they weren't going to do that, then they probably weren't going to spend extra money. And two, I think that they like the idea of hiring a coach as Chris Paul is also deciding to come back. So, they lose the risk of, let's say they get Stan Van Gundy and Paul clashes with him. Well, you want Paul to be as happy as possible going into his year when he's going to re-sign. And so I think that that's sort of what they did. Personality-wise, I don't know how Van Gundy and Paul would get along because, Paul does like to control the team to a degree, and Van Gundy himself is a controller. So that's kind of my take. What do you think, Zach?
I think that this is the Clippers, and this is what they do. They have small bouts of success before the overall culture and just evil oozing out of Donald Sterling takes over and ruins the situation. I mean, they had a chance to really get some momentum. Would it shock you if 4 years from now Blake Griffin and Chris Paul are on different teams than the Clippers? I mean, I just think that they bring a little bit of juice every few years. They had that team with Sam Cassell, I think in 05 or 06. That looked pretty decent, might have some potential, and then it falls apart because they're the Clippers. This is what Donald Sterling does. He just ruins everything.
But I don't think you can compare that team to this team. I mean, this would be like if the Darius Miles, Lamar Odom team had somehow been kind of good, because this team is young and Cassell was sort of like an old hand at that point, and I do have to concede that Donald Sterling ruins everything. But I think also what's been problematic is the players that they've picked up have been has-beens, right? Like, they haven't been able to sign a player who is going to get better, and I think that that's the real damning thing about this team, is that they're not the Heat. They're not in a position where they can just take on scraps and get and maintain. They need to find better players, and if they're not going to give Bledsoe big starters minutes, which I believe they should, and they're going to sign old dudes, then they're not going anywhere.
I think that just real quick, I think an important thing to note is that just like the Clipper culture. You would think that you could overcome that because they're in a big market, because all we hear about is how big markets take over the NBA, and it has nothing to do with ownership. But it really does show you that it doesn't matter that they're in the second biggest market in the league. They're still ruined by a bad owner and often bad management.
Yeah, and I guess that's my question with the Clippers, is that I don't know how much fundamentally they're into winning or care about winning, or Donald Sterling from the top cares about winning. I don't know if it's a primary focus of his, as strange as that is to say. I think he'll take it if it happens, but I think that he is more interested in making money and also trolling people. I think Donald Sterling is a big troll. I think that's one of the reasons why we have Vinny Del Negro coaching this team. It's a classic troll action when everybody in the world thinks you should fire your coach, and you just continue to slog on forward with him. So I think that's what makes the Clippers interesting to me. They have a lot of potential if they're run by different people. If you give this squad and these two players to somebody other than VDN and Donald Sterling, it's a much different circumstance.
Sure. No, and I don't know if he's trolling, because that implies that he's purposely pissing us off, and I don't think that's the case. I think that
it is.
Vinny Del Negro is very charming in person. He's a former player. He's sort of presidential in a way, with those flowing locks that cover whatever's going on at the top of his ears. And I think that a lot of owners make those personnel decisions not based on, really smart insight, but on, okay, do I like this guy? Is he someone I'll feel cool hanging around with? And believe it or not, Vinny Del Negro checks those boxes.
That's true. And the unspoken box of white former American player that we just can't really talk about that. How if you fit that criteria, you were just given a job upon retirement, regardless of expertise. Not that that's influencing anything at all.
As Meta World Peace would point out, he's white, isn't he? I don't know if you guys saw that tweet that Mark Bedita had asked Meta World Peace if Steve Nash was the smartest player on the Lakers, and he said he's white, isn't he, or something to that effect. Which, I think he's sort of like being funny. I hope, but I also think that that's a fairly succinct declaration of how white coaches and white PM guys. If you're in the NBA and you were white, then you must have done it with smarts. You couldn't have just been like a super athlete.
Yeah.
So I think there's a big a sense that they've got some savvy, some grit that they're gonna unload on the team and gonna make them better. When in reality, that's often not the case.
Yeah, and Jared Dubin has a good point too, where we also do this with point guards, where if you're a former point guard, here's your team. But if you're Patrick Ewing, no, we're just going to snicker and make fun of you year after year and act like you can't handle responsibility. So there's also a pro point guard bias, along with perhaps some other dirtier biases out there.
Yeah, and as Zach can attest to, having lived in Sacramento for a few years, once things get entrenched in dysfunctional systems, can be awful hard to get the people out who are in power to be not in power.
I thought the point you were going to make was, as Zach well knows, people just love white people. I thought that was the direction for the Timberwolves.
Soda writer.
The whiteness of the Wolves, I don't know if you guys have noticed, but they're like 75% white. And all just smart, gritty players doing the most with the least available to them.
They have so much leash to work with. It's really quite incredible.
Yeah, no, I think there should be a caption contest for that team to give them a new name besides the Wolves. My vote is the Minnesota Blizzard, but we'll open that up to the forum. Which reminds me, you can email hoopspeaklive@gmail.com, and if you have something funny or mean to say about Zach, then we will read it on air.
We will. We definitely will.
All right, well, this was a bit of a disjointed show, but we are going to hop to Dagger Smash Noted in a second. I want to remind everyone that we'll be back at 3 tomorrow with Tom Haberstroh of the Heat Index and ESPN Insider. Handsome Tom Haberstroh, friend of the show, former co-host. He's guest hosted a few times, and we are going to have a very good time with him. in the least creepy way possible. I was like, anyway. And then on Friday, we have Kevin Arnovitz coming by, the father of HoopSpeak Live. And so come back for those episodes. Now let's hop to Dagger Smash Noted. And who has the dagger?
Oh, I believe I'll be taking the dagger today. I saw that Darren Williams told Billy King not to wait on Dwight, that it wasn't right to wait on Dwight and just build the team and prepare for Brooklyn, and Billy King was all about it. I tend to believe that if Billy King buys into an idea, it's probably a bad one. I think there should be a certain confidence in your front office and in your upper management of a direction for the team, and stop listening to players, because that's when you get Big Baby for 4 years in Orlando, even though Dwight is long gone, and you had Jason Richardson's contract to get rid of, even though Dwight is long gone. Maybe just have faith in your system and don't worry about pleasing the stars, and perhaps you can become the Spurs someday.
A very moralistic dagger from Zach.
So
very pious. Well, I'm gonna go with the smash, and it's odd. I really should have gone with the dagger for this, because I was watching Saving Private Ryan recently, and if you rewatch the death scene of Adam Goldberg's character when he is fighting hand-to-hand combat with a Nazi, it really doesn't make sense. The final stab of it doesn't make sense if you watch it again as to why he doesn't do anything to block it. It's a very cinematic, unconvincing death scene where the German soldier that he's fighting just kind of slowly stabs him, and you're like, hey, don't do that. And the guy's like going about, there's no mile per hour, I suppose, with stabbage, but I would just say, as much as we credit that Spielberg movie, and as good as it is, as fantastic as that Beaches of Normandy scene is, it almost seems like at the end, Spielberg was like, it ends how it ends. So I would just recommend you watch that scene of Saving Private Ryan and tweet me about it. I want to know what you guys think. It's a very important basketball matter.
I think we're going to agree Braveheart is the better war movie. Beckley, go.
I was gonna point out, I'm pretty sure he's struggling against him, which is why it's going slowly.
Possibly.
I think that there's
there.
I don't think that he's like.
Let's see if before we end the show, I'm gonna look for it as you wrap up. We're gonna see if I can find it and put a link to it.
All right, fine. My noted comes from something that a couple of my friends and I would like to do at parties is just see how many times we can use the phrase "in this economy." And like, no matter what someone said, you just followed up with like, "Oh, in this economy," and that made me think of Chris Mannix's SI, or Chris Mannix of SI. Let me get the words out here. Wrote something kind of interesting about Euro players coming to college instead of going pro immediately, and saying that the weakness of the Euro and the lack of money in the Euro League right now was driving players to think that they had a better chance of getting to the NBA by going through college than by making money for a few years. And, the Rubios and such will always get good contracts, but there's some mid-level guys that, are ending up in big ACC-type colleges. And I just thought that was interesting and, thought I would note it. Getting this.
One more thing to note. From this light, with the way my hair is, it almost looks like a toupee.
Almost.
That's a good.
I think it's one of those. That's a good cover-up. That's very well done. Very nicely done, Zach. And on the upside, losing your hair early means that you have more testosterone. So at least you can, you take some pride in that.
I'm all estrogen.
Okay, before we go out, Henry Abbott tweeted about this. We have a bit of an eyebrow contest going on at HoopSpeak Live. I just I'm going to take myself off here, and we're going to go to the theme song. But first, can we get an up-close eyebrow off between Zach and Ethan? And then, James, can you take us to the song? See you later, guys. Come back tomorrow, 3 p.m. Eastern. Tom Haber.
I taught my bird to whistle like a referee. I can make a free throw when I'm down on one knee. I've been a fan of basketball since I was 5. analysis, a mystifying trope. An angel with a cudgel breaking bubbles of soap. Like honeybees buzzing around a hive. Yeah, everybody buzzing about HoopSpeak Live.